Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Book Dragons podcast. Today we have a guest, Tabitha, who wrote the Chronicles of Three trilogy as well as the Wolf Queen. Previously, I've read the trilogy and it's amazing. Highly recommend it to any fantasy fans. But yeah, let's get straight to it. So are you writing something at the moment, and is that like a sequel to The Wolf Queen, or is it a
No,
standalone?
it's another standalone that like I said, I just finished. I finished my first draft of it and then did a couple of revisions, and
Cool.
so it's finished for now,
Yeah.
and I've sent it, and then I have another project that I also started in 2019, and I'm about 20,000 words in, so now I'll
Nice.
pick that up.
Oh, nice. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, the first lot of questions I've got is set on the trilogy. One,
Oh,
because I loved it and I've read them all. But yeah, the first one was like the inspiration for the series because I got a lot of feeling of like spiritual sort of guidance and all of that, and I know you probably have some sort of connection to that
mhm.
yourself. Was that what sort of started the thought of the series, or was it something else that sort of kicked it off?
I pretty much with everything that I write, I get usually a spark of an idea that's something completely random.
Yeah.
It's one line, it's maybe an image in my head, maybe I see a picture of something that prompts it. So for me, the spiritual aspects, the faith elements aren't where I start.
Yeah.
They tend to happen. I was talking to someone else about this because I'm also a pastor, an ordained minister. And so my
Yeah.
faith is really important to me and
Yes.
central to who I am. So I feel like it's going to come out and come up in what I write because it is just
Oh.
a really big part of me. But I never sit down and go, this is the faith element I want to include. It's
Yeah.
just what works organically. And I think for TCO3 for the trilogy, I mean, it's definitely super visible because they're demon slayers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a spiritual aspect built into the plot,
Yeah.
but the deeper spiritual aspect that really ties into my faith as a Christian was just pretty natural because it's just
Yeah.
how I think and it's how I view the world. And I try to keep it organic like that. I feel like it's more accessible when this is just an organic part of who I am
Yeah.
and not something I'm trying to like force into the
Yeah.
story.
I definitely got that feeling from reading it because it flowed really well. That it didn't seem forced in any way whatsoever. Um, and also I feel if it comes organically, it makes it feel organic in the book as well. But yeah, that's because I think definitely the first one it was touched on a little bit, but as the series went on, as you said in the third book, it was a lot more prominent. But I kind of liked that it was sort of an organic thing, and it wasn't sort of like okay, I've got to add these little bits in here or there, because that sort of gives the whole book the authenticity that it has for like the characters and the whole like the maker and everything. Because the maker always comes at the point that's needed. It's
Yeah.
not overused because I think if, say for example, the maker was the thing that sparked your book idea, um, you would obviously want to use that point as often as possible. So I think as I said, because it was organic and it came naturally, and you sort of, because I guess you sort of had a feeling like, okay, this is a good point to fit it in, or it's like
Yeah.
so sort of, you
It's
definitely
very
get that with the books because it's just sort
and
of
a lot of the conversations that end up bringing in some of those faith elements that aren't quite as maybe in your face are also just normal for me because again this is
yeah
something I believe it's part of who I am, so those conversations are pretty organic in my
yeah
life anyway, and not even just as also a pastor and a minister, but just in my conversations with my husband, with my kids, because it's what we believe
yeah
and it's very central to who we are. Those are normal conversations
yeah
to bring around to those subjects. And so trying to also make it feel that way in the book, that it wasn't like, oh, let's have a conversation that feels super spiritual.
Yeah.
It's just, if I were to have a conversation about fear, if I were to have a conversation about guilt or shame or temptation or any of those things that kind of come up in places in the book, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the conversation I would have normally. Like
Yeah. I
that's how
totally
I talk to
understand that.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's sort of like exactly as you were saying. It's sort of like because it's natural for you, it's natural to pull it in and sort of yeah. Because say if because I'm not heavily spiritual in that sort of sense. If I tried doing it myself, I think I would focus too much on it or not enough for it not being
Yeah.
sort of. You would definitely feel it was sort of forced. But yeah, that, as I said earlier on, that's exactly why I like how you've written it and how it's all sort of so well done. Is because, as you said, it's part of your life, it's part of your daily occurrence for you. So it's yeah, it just makes it seem so much more natural. But yeah, carrying on from that thing, what got you into demon slaying for the plot for it?
I don't know. It's usually like, I don't know. These things just come to me.
Yeah,
Really, before the demon slaying, the idea for the book started with this image of like, in the book there is a book, the ancient
yeah,
chronicle book, and it was an image of that and this kind of magical, sacred type of book. And usually for me, like I said, that one image or that one line then
yeah,
gets me asking questions. So then it was like, okay, what's in this book? Who would find this book? Who would read this book? What are they doing with it? Why would they, like, is this book something that they need? And if so, why? And from that, it kind of just went to the direction of like demon slaying.
yeah,
And I feel like some of that, again, is just my faith. And that's, so
yeah.
those kind of things, not that my faith is demon slaying, but
No.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like those
yeah,
kind of elements
yeah.
are
Like
not like,
metaphorical demons and stuff
yeah,
like that.
those kind of elements mix well.
Yeah.
But I really love urban fantasy. I'm a huge
Oh
Buffy
yes. Oh
fan.
yes.
So that part of it too. And so we're not going to slay vampires,
No.
but we'll slay something else. And so that just, it felt like with all of the pieces,
Yeah.
that just seemed like the right fit as I answered the questions about that initial inspirational like image in my
Yeah.
mind of where to take it and have that kind of Buffy
Vibe.
supernatural
Nice.
vibe.
Yeah. Because yeah, that's exactly how I'm writing my books. This is sort of yeah, the idea comes to me, and I evolve off of that. But did you ever have like roadblocks, or like parts where you sort of you're really confident and like halfway through, and then you just have a block? Did you ever have any of those issues, or was it all pretty
Oh
nice?
no, yeah, all the time.
Oh no. Okay.
The first book, I mean, one, I think there's little blocks along the way, because anytime we're doing anything creative, not just writing, but depending on where you are, like with your mental health, if I'm too tired, if I'm too burnt out, if my anxiety is really high, it's hard for me to be creative. So those can become little blocks that don't
Oh yeah.
necessarily block the plot, but they block the words for that day.
Yeah.
And I have to, for me, a big part of those kind of little writer's block moments is giving myself permission to take a break
Yeah.
and to take a step back, and not force it. There are times when you've just got to kind of force it and fight through to get that first draft done. And then there are other times where it's okay to say, today is just not the day that any good words or useful
Yeah.
words are going to happen. So I just have to take a step back. For the bigger like writer's block moments where it's as I'm plotting or as I'm writing and trying to figure out what moves the characters need to make and if something works, I tend to plot out all the major story beats
Yeah.
before I start writing. And I tend to be flexible because sometimes I'll plot something out and then in the writing it changes.
Yeah.
But I have the major things plotted out, but there were definitely moments there are moments for me in all of my stories where I'm like, something. Usually, it's when something changes, or I plotted something and I'm like, that sounded really good in theory, but now I don't know that I can make it work.
Yeah.
For me, one big one for TCO3 was the Lucas and his story arc,
Yeah.
where I kind of always, there was a moment in the first book where we kind of have a flashback of Lucas's childhood.
Yeah.
That was not planned. It just sort of happened. And I can't explain how it just sort of happened other than I decided to start writing a chapter from his point of view, and that chapter happened, and I sat back when it was done and I was like, this was not what I was thinking at all. But that chapter in some ways changed that character a lot. I always knew from the very beginning, I always knew how the second book would end. And I won't spoil it for anyone, but you've read it. You know how it ends. I'm real sorry. But I always knew how that book would end. But I didn't feel the way I felt about it when I first planned it as when I was actually writing it, because suddenly this character was different than I thought he was going to be. This snarky little guy, like, won me over and he won my heart. And so because of that, when I finished book 2, and I really fought for a while of, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
And then, but I knew I had to, like, it needed to happen for other things. But I really wrestled then with some other things in book 3 because of that. And so there's a big thing that happens with that character in book 3, which, again, if you've read it, then you know what happens in the end of book 2, so you know what happened. And that was not initially part of the plan.
Yeah. Okay.
But because some things changed, and that took some working out. That took some sitting back and going, okay.
Yeah.
I don't like what I've done, and I want to fix it for everybody so that we can all be happy at the end. And how am I going to do that?
Yeah.
And what's it going to look like? I think, and even there were moments in The Wolf Queen where I'm making adjustments and does this really work? And I'm questioning some things. The manuscript that I just finished and submitted, part of the reason I didn't write anything on that for all of 2020, besides, global pandemics that were stressing us all out and stealing creativity, was that's the first book that I have started that I didn't know how it was going to end.
Oh, wow.
When I started it. And so I got to this point where I'm hitting this climax and I have to figure out the ending. Yeah. And I just could not figure it out. I couldn't figure it out, and everything that would come to my mind just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it fit. And finally, in January, I was starting to write again. I was starting to get my groove back with writing, and I kind of had like an epiphany moment where a light bulb went on, and I figured out what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I had to figure out how to make that work and make that plausible, so that it felt like the right ending for the reader. It felt like the right ending for me, but then is it going to feel like the right ending? And so that a lot of times when those moments happen, I just have to stop and just brainstorm, kind of let myself breathe and think it through and not panic. I really wanted to panic and go, I was like, can everything just blow up and that's how it ends? Like, that's and then it all exploded. Like,
easy fix.
Like bombs, explosion, and so it just takes kind of just that tinkering with it and working through it. And I think as you brainstorm and kind of again ask those questions, what feels like the right course of action for these characters in this moment? Like, what is motivating them, and where would those motivations lead a person? And then just tinkering with it until it works, and giving ourselves permission that sometimes that takes more time than we wish it would take.
Yeah, I guess that just shows sort of, depending on how you write the book, depends on how you feel about it. Because as you said, with the trilogy, you planned it all ahead. Obviously, you made changes and stuff, but it sounds like a lot of the stuff you planned stayed the same. Um, but yeah, the fact I think also that's different as well. A trilogy being instead of a standalone is obviously there's you're trying to cram a lot in. I feel with like a standalone compared to a trilogy. Even though in the trilogy a lot happened, I think if you were to just to make it a standalone book, you would obviously skip bits out like character development sometimes, and stuff like that. So I think that's definitely I can understand what you were saying about with Lucas and that with the series is you come to sort of especially as you're writing it you kind of feel to know the characters
Yeah.
and you feel as what's happening has happened, so you kind of like yeah again it just becomes natural in with your writing you sort of like you not become them but you think like them. So yeah you sort of as you're saying you had the intention of how it was all going to work out, but obviously as you were writing you were like okay maybe there is a different side to him than we thought, which again I really liked, especially the fact with the backstory that you wrote as well. That worked really well because I think sometimes you need that, especially though that's quite interesting that you didn't intend for him to sort of be like a good guy kind of thing near in the end.
Well, I think I always intended him to become kind of a good guy,
Oh, okay.
but I didn't think I would like him as much as I did.
Yeah.
Like I thought he was always still going to be like this outlier to a point that he was going to become good, but not necessarily part of the family.
Yeah.
And that moment is what made him part of the family because I'm like, oh, like,
Yeah. You start feeling.
but sweetie, I didn't realize that that happened to you. And
Yeah.
that's, you know, and so, and especially, I think too, you know, for me, I plot the major points. I know the beginning from the end, but then you get in there, and when you're really in a scene, and that's the moment where you're, like you said, you're getting to know these characters,
Yeah.
and they're very real to you while you're writing them because they have to be in order to be
Yeah.
real for the reader. And so in those scenes when you're really fleshing out their feelings and their motivations and their reactions, you get to know them more. And so maybe the thing you planned, you're going, but they actually would never do that.
Yeah.
So I either have to change it or I have to change their like get them there to the point that they would, which those to me are the fun parts because
Yes.
I like being surprised when I'm writing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know what's going to happen. I know what the end is, but I like having those moments where I sit back and go, oh, I didn't see that coming, which feels weird because I wrote
Yeah.
it. But
I
like, I
completely
like
get what you
those
mean.
moments.
Yeah. Sort of like that saying is like it's not the destination, it's how you get there kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have that issue with the first book I wrote. I've not done any more drafts or anything with it, but it intended to be like a full-fledged horror novel and gore and everything. But literally after the first chapter, and I was writing the characters, I'm like, no, this is good. This isn't right. This doesn't feel right for these characters. So I ended up changing it to like a drama, thriller, mystery kind of novel, because exactly as you were saying, is like you as you're writing, you get surprised with how the characters turn out to be, even though you had the whole plan set out for what was going to happen. By the time, as I said, by the time I got to like chapter 2 and all this stuff happened, I'm like, wait, no, how did they get into that position to do that? Why did they do that? And I ended up thinking more about them rather than the story, which yeah is I think is important for, as you were saying, is like you need to make them feel real for the reader to make them think they're real. Um, but yeah, one of the things about the characters is, did anyone in real life give you inspiration for characters, or were they completely came in the moment?
Um, there's definitely some real life inspiration between Zoe and Claire. Those two characters, more than any other that I wrote, definitely I feel like had pieces of me in them as a teenager and then as an adult. I think there's some lines from Maggie and some bits and pieces of Maggie's personality that came from some of my students. and friends who are
Yeah.
that
Bubbly.
kind of bubbly, bright person.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's definitely in that way there's some inspiration from people in my life. I don't ever sit down and write a character with a
Oh,
specific person in mind,
yeah.
but I'm sure but little lines will show up here and there. I do always throw in little Easter eggs that are shout outs to my kids, to my husband, to my
Yeah.
family that probably
Oh,
nobody
nice.
would know but us. So like Claire, my oldest daughter, her middle name is Claire. So just
Yeah.
using that name.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
there are some dates in the trilogy that are like my mom and dad's birthdays
Yeah.
to kind
Oh,
of throw those in there. My grandfather's name made his way in there some
yeah.
way. And then in the Wolf
Cool.
Queen, the main character has a birthmark and my daughter has a very similar
Oh,
birthmark.
wow.
Obviously, in the Wolf
Yeah.
Queen, the birthmark has to be a little more detailed
Yeah.
than my daughter's, but my daughter has a birthmark in the same spot that was kind of like inspiration for that. And then I'm it like there's a one of the realms is called Osland, and that is my grandmother's maiden name.
Oh, cool.
So and even the manuscript I just finished has some of those moments too, where it's just those little
Yeah.
details that just kind of bring my real life into it,
Yeah.
and I find them fun.
Yeah. I think it's fun to put them in, but also it's like if people that you know reads it, they could be like, oh, okay, I know that one, I know this one. So like, yeah, like, as you said, like little presents, Easter eggs for people that personally know you, to sort of get them out, which is quite fun, I think, because also it just adds to it a little bit. Um, but yeah, with the Wolf Queen, what's the plot for it? Because I know the general plot, um, but I know it's I'm trying to. I did read the first chapter. That was that was a little while ago. As I was saying, I've gone completely through a reader's block at the moment. Um, but yeah, what's the general plot for the Wolf Queen, if there can be one?
I can try and summarize it. I'm really bad
That's fine.
at these
Me too.
summaries, so this is not my best writing, trying to summarize all of the book words. But basically, we have a character, a clan leader named Ilva, who was raised by wolves. Although we find out maybe that wasn't exactly
Yeah.
the case, but that's what everyone believes about her. That's what she believes about herself until the story progresses. And she and her clan and the other clans in the Northlands realize that there is kind of this enemy that is infecting. The line is it's turning mortals into monsters. And so it's this darkness that is infecting people because an ancient evil has kind of reawoken and is raising a dragon, because every good fantasy story just needs a dragon
Yep.
thrown in there
Definitely.
for kicks and giggles. And so she kind of partners with this charming but also not so charming prince, and they are tasked with one, determining if this evil really is from some sort of magic or if it's something else, because the prince doesn't want to believe old superstitions and prophecies. And then as they find out that this really is something beyond just the realm of men, they have to figure out how they're going to stop it
Oh
for
wow.
good.
Yeah.
So that's right. And all along, Ilva is putting together the pieces of a childhood where, again, she thought that she was raised by wolves. And in
Yeah.
one way she was, but in another way she wasn't.
That's cool. But yeah, sounding from that, how that story is compared to the trilogy, it seems there was a lot more world building and stuff involved. How was that from your previous, like the trilogy, going from a trilogy? Because obviously it was set on Earth, and obviously you had the demons and everything like that you had to add. But how was it writing a book where it's in a completely different world of sorts?
It was really fun and exciting and also a little bit scary because, yeah, for TCO3 there is some world building because I have
Yeah.
these fantasy supernatural elements, but otherwise it was very real world with coffee shops and apple pie and all of that. And so I could just use my real world experience. Torch Creek is based on the hometown I grew up in, and
Oh, cool.
places there
Yeah.
based on places from my real life, which is another way that my real life makes its way in. And the Wolf Queen was just something totally different that I made it up.
Yeah.
And it has some Viking Nordic elements. And so I drew a lot from Viking history and tradition for some of the pieces. Not technically, because it is my own world. It's not just
Yeah.
a a historical fantasy. But so I did a lot of research on some of those Viking traditions and rituals and what
Oh,
they
wow.
ate and what they wore. And that was the fun part, kind of getting
Oh,
to
yeah.
pull all these pieces together. And because it was my own world, I could pull all the pieces I liked
Yeah.
and change the ones that I didn't. And so I pulled all of these pieces together to kind of build something new. It's always a little bit scary because when you get into it and you start realizing the little details that you have to think through.
Yeah.
And I had, there's another author, her name is Janine Ippolito, and she created a world building workbook that kind of helps you work through all of the pieces of a world in a lot of detail. And that was a huge help to me with this, because this is the first time I've written something where I'm creating in a
Yeah.
lot of ways from the ground up.
Yeah.
And when you get to a scene and you're like, the character's going to eat something, and I have to really stop and think about, well, what are they
Yeah.
going to eat? And for me, I mean, they're still they're not in a completely other world, so it was still apples and
Yeah. Yeah.
venison stew, but it wasn't like she can't just stop and have fries and a
Yeah.
cheeseburger. I've got to think through. Or if they're at what I would imagine is a similar place on the map to Sweden and Norway and Finland and those Scandinavian countries, like what kind of flowers would be there? I can't
Oh,
just use
yes.
anything. What kind of birds would be there? What kind of herbal remedies would they use? Because she can't just pop an aspirin because
Yeah.
she like dislocated a shoulder. So making sure that I did my homework enough on those parts, which usually happened as I wrote. I would get
Yeah.
to a point, oh, she's going to eat something. Oh, wait, what's she
Yeah.
going to eat?
Yeah. Yeah. I think. Yeah. I can't remember what one I was writing, but when I did writing sprints and stuff, I'm like, I used to do it with a friend, and like occasionally we got to a point where I was like, "Oh, so how many words did you write in these 15 minutes?" And it was usually, "Oh, I was doing research," because as you said, it's sort of like you get to a point where because I guess you could have done all the research beforehand, but you never know where you're going to be or what's going to happen and stuff like that. So you don't want to have like a binder full of all this information, and then you're on like a different country or something. You don't want to prepare for something that you're not too sure what to prepare for. But yeah, that I can imagine was fun, but also quite daunting, I guess, trying to figure out all these little details and stuff.
I think doing it as I wrote, there was a lot that I figured out ahead of time because I had to have a framework to start with
Yeah,
of what this society looks like going in. But then a lot of the little details, they also were a nice break as I'm writing and I get to a point. It gave me a moment to stop and go research and look at pictures, and that kind of helped a little bit. I have author friends who, I mean, they will have the binder at the
oh
beginning.
wow.
They can tell you everything about the world that they're building outside of what they need, and I am always very impressed
Yeah.
by that. I would spend so much time world building and working on all of that I would never get to the actual book. So
Yeah.
for me, I just try and have this basic framework of where's the location, what are the pieces of their society, their culture, their government that I need to know as I start out and
Yeah.
form this, what, and what can wait until a
Yeah.
little bit later.
Well, I guess you need some sort of foundation to start off from. Otherwise, yeah, you might get a bit lost trying to figure out from the start up. So at least that way you have something to go off of to start off with. But yeah, that's one thing that I am sort of daunted about is with some of my novel ideas is the world building side of it all, because exactly as you said, it's a nice break occasionally when you're like just having a break off of the novel and you can like. But I have a feeling I'll probably get stuck in a bit too much. Did that ever happen where you just spent hours just looking up all these little details?
It's why I liked Janine's workbook, because it gave me enough where I could go deeper, but I could also stop myself. And I also have found, like, when you Google, there's lots of like really cool worksheets that give you kind of the help to at least get started.
Yeah.
I mean, they can give you the help to deep dive and create the binder,
Yeah.
but they also can just be enough to get started on the pieces that you need. And I always create a Pinterest board for projects, and so I have in my head pictures, at least a little bit, of what clothing would look like, and
Yeah.
depending on how much, I mean, obviously, again, for the trilogy, I didn't need a whole lot of that because it's just real modern world. But for the Wolf Queen, and then for the one I just finished, which is the code name is Project They Might Be Aliens.
Oh, okay. I like that.
I have. We haven't decided on a title yet, so we all have to wait on that. But Project They Might Be Aliens. I had, like, for those, the Pinterest boards were really helpful.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't doing a ton of research and writing a lot of notes, but I had picture images that I could go and look to. They also are good because as I'm writing, okay, wait a minute, what does that character's, armor need to look like? Let me go look at that picture, and it gives me a visual reference.
Yeah, I was just going to say the Pinterest board is quite handy because, exactly as you said, it's a visual representation of ideas and stuff. So it could be just sort of like, I don't know, a landscape, and that would be good for inspiration of what's going to happen or how the environment is. But then, yeah, if you've got stuff of what they wear and all of that, it's very handy instead of you trying to guess or like have. I guess you could like Google Images and have like a folder of stuff on your computer, but Pinterest is quite handy because you could just sort of have it all laid out for you in a nice little post. But yeah.
Oh, for sure. And now, because you can have a board and then you can have sections within the board. So I'll have, like, for TCO3 trilogy, there's the TCO3 board, and then each of the main characters has their own section. And then, like, I can have a section, or like the Wolf Queen, I have a board, and then each character has a section, and then each of the main locations has a section, and then costuming has this, so I can easily find what I need.
Yeah.
If I'm just like, oh, I need to just, like, she changed wardrobe, I need an image to help describe what this looks like. It's really easy. I go a little crazy on the Pinterest board.
Yeah, it's hard not to, especially if you're researching images. You end up tagging quite a lot of random stuff.
I mean, it makes me feel like I'm being super productive as a writer, even though I'm not actually doing any writing.
Yeah, but at least it prepares you for when you do need it. But yeah, out of the 4 books so far, what was your favourite one to write? Because I know it's a hard question because the trilogy was obviously a trilogy. But was there?
Question, Kane. I will say the Wolf Queen and the trilogy are so very different that it's hard to kind of choose between them, because when each book is really different, it's just hard, and they say different things and they're at different times. So I couldn't choose between them. I will say, out of the trilogy, the second book, Armor Bearer, is my favorite. It was my favorite to write. And when all was said and done, it is kind of my favorite. I feel bad even saying it because they're all, in a way, they're all one piece.
Yeah.
But I felt like with that one, I was a little more comfortable to go a little bit darker and a little bit just more intense than I was with Bloodline, because that was the first fiction thing I had written. And then Eden's Sword was just hard because it was the end. Yeah. And I didn't want it to end. And tying all the pieces together was a lot of pressure. Yeah. But I really am proud of the way Armor Bearer turned out.
Yeah.
And so that one would be my
Yeah,
favorite.
I might agree with that because yeah, I think the first one was because it's sort of. I think the first one was just laying the land and the characters and sort of getting a feel for it. But the way that ended was perfect because I was like, wait, it's ended. Let me get on to the next one. Just get into
I
that
know.
one.
And I have new readers now who are just picking up the trilogy who didn't have to go through the finishing book 2 and waiting a whole year for book 3.
Yeah,
And so it's like, just you guys are really lucky because
yeah,
there was a whole group of people that had to end book 2
yeah,
and be really mad at me for like a whole year. And I got lots
yeah.
of emails
Oh
and
no.
DMs, and they were not bad. They were
Okay,
nice.
they're just yeah,
They were not like mean,
no,
but they were like, "Why did you do this? I'm really sad right now." And I
yeah,
just kept going, "Look, I'm sad too.
yeah,
Like I cried while I if it makes you feel better, I cried while I wrote it.
yeah.
And I cried while I edited it, and I
Oh,
cried like because it was one of those, even as I'm writing it, I'm going, "No, no,
yeah,
don't do this. Like what are you thinking?" And um but I also, the reaction just proved to me that that was the exact right way
yeah,
for that book to end.
yeah. But yeah, I'm so glad I didn't have to wait to read the third one because as soon as I finished it, I picked up the third one just to read the first chapter, just to know, sort of have a feel what
I just
happened.
need something, I need to know that
Yeah,
it's going to be okay.
yeah,
I always tell people I'm a big fan of Happily Ever After.
yeah,
I'm a big fan of, I'm okay with the bittersweet ending, but I like closure and I
yeah,
like to feel good about the ending. I like to feel like this that we can all breathe easy at the
yeah,
end. And so, I mean, I'm not going to promise that there aren't a whole lot of like moments where like,
yeah,
but I always tell, just keep reading. The same thing
yeah,
happened in Wolf Queen. In the Wolf Queen, you get to around chapter 40.
yeah,
And that's when I would have like friends of mine DMing me, like, what are you doing?
yeah,
I don't like where this is headed. I don't like it. I don't like it. And I'm like, just keep reading. Just keep reading. And then they're
yeah,
like, I don't like it. Keep reading. Now I really don't like it. Just keep reading.
yeah,
Just keep reading.
yeah,
It's,
yeah.
it's all you can say.
Yeah, because yeah, I definitely get that with quite a lot of books. Is where you start reading it and you just like you have a bad feeling something's gonna happen. That's not good for the book, but not for your connections to the characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the worst thing is though is if you get to the end of a book and it is sort of like a really sad ending, but at the same time, exactly as you're saying, is like with closure and stuff. Even if it is a horrible ending, as long as you know what's happened has happened and you know how it ends and it's all sort of tied up, maybe not in a nice bow, but a bow of
In a
sorts.
way, I feel like that makes sense.
Yeah,
That I feel like even if I don't like the way it ended because it wasn't all happy and riding off into the sunset, if it felt like if it felt right,
yeah,
then I like that. And I like a little bit of happy ride off into the sunset too. I
yeah,
like those moments, but I also, because I personally like in movies or TV shows or books, when you kind of get your heart ripped out because something happens
yeah,
and I feel like it doesn't feel good at the time because we're all sad or
yeah,
angry. But I think it's good because that means we really connected with that character. They
yeah,
felt real to us if we get to this moment and find ourselves, emotional because we were emotionally invested. So
yeah,
I think that's why writers, there's always this joke that it's like trying to kill off characters or make readers cry. And
yeah,
that's never my goal. But I like those moments when I hear from readers, like, what did you just do to me? Like, are you kidding? Like, no,
yeah,
because I feel like I did a good job
yeah,
at connecting you to the character. I'm a big character driven person. I can put up with a lot of other issues, maybe not
yeah,
big ones, but I can put up with a lot if I'm super invested in the characters.
yeah,
And when you're invested in the characters, it hurts when they
yeah,
hurt. Um, but that's also why I like an ending that kind of ties things
yeah,
up, even if it's not super exactly happy,
but
it's enough to
it's
make me feel like, well, that was right.
yeah,
It made sense.
nice enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I told you as soon as I finished the all the books how well I thought you did with the characters, because I think every single character I sort of connected with and sort of felt sorry for when stuff happened. I think with the fight scenes especially, and you sort of like you get to those sort of, I think with most fight scenes you get to a point where it's like one's a little bit too close to a certain someone and you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? Whenever I was reading the fight scenes in it, I was just like, no, don't, no, stop, you're too close, get away, run away.
That right there. Let's
Yeah.
rethink this.
But yeah, I think, but yeah, again, back to what I was saying earlier on about the first book being sort of like a world builder of it all and sort of like getting to know the characters. I loved how that worked out, because obviously you get to know Zoe and Claire and all those people, and even though you get to know more people as the books go on, because they're like the main characters throughout. You you did a really good job of sort of setting those characters to sort of have emotions, even if it was just sort of like happy day to day stuff that was going on. You could still sort of feel happy, because I think a lot of people think that sometimes you need bad things to happen to be able to sort of feel for the characters. But if they're done right, like you did, they could do something happy, like I don't know, go out for breakfast and have a laugh, and you could sort of read that and you would catch yourself like smiling to it and stuff like that. But yeah, the trilogy definitely has its ups and downs emotionally.
It definitely does. But you need the moments where you just went out to pie together
Yeah,
to fill in. Because
pity
I
eggs.
always like that and appreciate that too, that those moments of happy relief.
Yeah,
Because I think you're right. You can still connect to a character there. I think then it's like, these are people I would like to go have a slice of pie with.
yeah,
These are people I would like to go have a cup of coffee with. And so you can enjoy that moment, and it gives a little breather in between the really horrible things that are also
yes,
happening to them.
definitely. Because yeah, I think exactly with that, it's sort of like if they're going out for pie and stuff, it's usually after a battle or something bad's happened and they have like a little break. It's nice for the reader to sort of just be like, okay, it's all good for a moment. We could just settle down and listen, read this little happy section before something bad's gonna happen again.
Which is nice. The Wolf Queen has some of that, because again, it's a very different world and a very
Yeah.
different story. It's not quite the same, but I tried to still add in some elements that give you those moments of a little bit of humor, a little bit of lightheartedness to kind of balance out. In Project, they might be aliens. I feel like there's just a lot of emotional moments and not
Yeah.
nearly as many good ones
Oh.
because of just the nature of that story.
Yeah,
But it's just different.
yeah,
And I think that one took a long time to write too, because I didn't have like those happy pie moments are nice for me because I get a little bit of an emotional breather.
yeah,
And so the Wolf Queen was a little more intense. Project They Might Be Aliens was definitely a lot more intense for me because I didn't get the breathers.
yeah. Oh, okay.
I was able to add them in here and there.
Yeah.
And I did even manage to make a pie joke
Hey.
because
Nice.
that's part of who I am too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think the sort of the breather parts are quite nice, as you were saying. It's nice for you as well, but also I guess they come a little bit more naturally as you're writing, I guess, because it's usually conversations and sort of, especially as you're saying, because of the trilogy, it's more earth based, so you can sort of go out for, as you say, in pie, or just go to the cinema or stuff like that, because they're quite close to home and easy to relate to. I guess it's a lot easier to just sort of write up a chapter of going out for dinner or something like that, because especially with like normal conversations, that's one thing I quite like with some of my books, is whenever I'm writing conversations, I'm writing it so quickly, because in my head I'm like imagining the characters are obviously talking, and it just comes so quickly and naturally half the time until it relates to something previously or something that might happen. But that's just because I'm not good with doing notes and stuff. It's usually to the point where I'm like, okay, I've got all this information. Wait, what was that thing that they had earlier on? Or who was that person they bumped into? Do Did you ever have those issues? Because you're saying obviously you plan like the beginning, middle, and end of a lot of them, but did you ever have issues where you had to sort of like go back
Oh yeah,
a
all the
couple
time.
of books? Oh no.
All the time. I for my most recent project, I actually purchased Scrivener
Oh
to
yes.
use to write. But I would do the same thing even in just pages or a Word document. Is as I'm writing. A lot of times, if I was like really in the flow and it was just a small detail,
Yeah.
I would just make it a comment and leave myself a note that says the number of times I had to double check a character's eye color will astound you.
Yeah.
And so it was constantly like, because it's like I haven't mentioned his eye color for 20 chapters.
Yeah.
And it really is important to mention here because of whatever context,
Yeah.
but I don't remember and I don't want to stop and go searching for it now. So I would just I would like highlight it in my document and leave a little note that
Yeah.
says double check
That's
that
smart. That.
is this really the number of people that were at this thing? So a lot of times when it's little things like that, that I definitely need to know and make sure that I'm consistent with, I just leave myself a note, or I'll make myself an editing note that says, hey, go back and check the consistency
Yeah.
of this and fill in the blank. If it's a bigger plot point and I just don't remember, I'll stop and go back. But I have
Yeah.
to do that all like the number of times, especially like in the trilogy, because by the time I got to book 3,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What happened in book 1 again? Like
Too much
who is
information.
this person? Like what is going on? And so I would have to go and double check there a lot
Yeah.
in that, because between book to book it was different. But I have to do that all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
especially like you're taking months, a year. I mean,
yeah.
the project They Might Be Aliens is going to end up having been 3 years
Oh,
for
wow.
me to draft. I mean,
Yeah.
one of those years was because I didn't write anything,
Yeah.
but still, like, but then that was a whole year. So when I came back to pick up where I left off, I had stopped at like 50,000 words
Yeah.
and I hadn't written in a really long time. So I had to actually go back and start from the beginning and reread
Oh.
all of
yeah.
it to refresh my memory. So I tend to do that a lot. And then another thing that I have learned that helps me, this is a tip that someone else, and that I got from another writer, so I'm just passing along,
Yeah.
is when I'm writing and I finish a writing session for the day, whether I'm finishing at the end of the chapter or just the end of a scene, but I've got to stop for the day, is I will make notes right there at the end. I'll just like skip down a couple lines and just really quickly, okay, this is what they just did. This is what needs to happen next.
Yeah.
So that when I pick up the document the next time, especially if I'm not going to be able to write again for a couple days or even longer, so that when I open it up and I get to that end point, I usually reread the chapter or scene that I previously wrote, but then I have those notes that remind me what I was thinking while I was in the groove,
Yeah.
that help me pick back up and remember outside. Because that's where I look at like my plot notes is just like we have to go from point A to point B to point C to the end.
Yeah.
And so when I get to the end of writing a scene, I'll look and go, okay, where are we at in this outline? Okay, so this is probably something like this is what needs to happen next. Or this conversation is going to have to come next.
Yeah.
Kind of thing to help keep me from forgetting. Because otherwise I have these really great ideas, but then I come back the next day and I don't remember any of them.
Yeah. That's a really good tip because the amount of times where she's exactly as you were saying, is like you get in the groove of writing, but you have to stop. So it's good to leave a note. But I never did that. I've never done that. So then whenever I get back into it, I kind of completely forget what I was going for. So sometimes I have to reread the last chapter or two just to sort of get in that groove of it all. But no, that's a good idea with like the comments and stuff because I think I don't think did you ever have issues with names? Because with the first book I wrote, for the first 4 chapters, I just put in air quotes name for where the name should be because I just could not come up with a name for these characters. So when I went back through to sort of once I had all the names, I got so confused because if it was like conversations and stuff, I'm like, wait, which one was saying it at this point? And I just, yeah, it was horrible. But
I
did the names come
usually
easy?
name, they don't always come easy. Sometimes they do. Um, I do always know the main group of characters, their names ahead of time. That's one
Yeah,
thing that I always do before I start writing. And part of that is because I really love names. A lot of times the names I choose for a character have meaning.
yeah,
Either the actual meaning of the name goes with something about the character or it just has a meaning to me. But so I tend to know most of the names going in. Occasionally, you'll get in there and like for project they might be aliens. I had a servant that I decided to name because it adds to the realism to
yeah,
give him a name instead of just calling him a servant. I didn't give every servant a name, but I gave this one. And his name kind of was just in the moment. Like,
yeah,
okay, I'm going to give this guy a name. He literally has 2 lines in the whole book. He opens and closes doors for the
yeah,
High Roller. So I want to give him a name. It just needs to be a name that fits this culture.
yeah,
And so I would just pick one. Um, I do still sometimes for project, they might be aliens. There's a lot, I have a whole like community of people. And so I found myself after taking a break, coming back, having to go back and refresh my memory on everyone's names. Cause I
yeah,
was like, wait a minute, what did I name him? Was
yeah,
it? And partly because they were all, I mean, most of them are fairly normal names. I was like, was it Sam? It feels like it
yeah,
was Sam, but I'm not sure it was Sam. And so I had to go back and double check that.
yeah,
But otherwise, I would probably be the same way. If I just put in like insert character name
yeah,
here, I would get myself in a lot of trouble.
yeah, yeah. It was
A lot.
definitely confusing.
But I love, like, the part of it, I love coming up with the characters' names. And for me, when I'm planning a story, giving them a name is when I really kind of get to know exactly
Yes,
who they are. Like the names for me are that piece that really signify this is who this character is. Even if it's not a name with a huge meaning, like Maggie just felt right
yeah,
for her name. There wasn't, I didn't research a lot for that, but it's because it felt right. It solidified that character in my head. For the Wolf Queen, almost all of the names have meaning. And
yeah.
because they
Okay.
needed to fit the world I was building, it doesn't really make sense to have someone named like, I don't know, Chad
Yeah,
or in this. So I looked up names for meanings, and that was a really fun day of
yeah,
research because I love naming my characters.
yeah.
And so picking all of their names was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you were saying about like once as soon as they get the name, that's when you can start properly like connecting with them and stuff, and they become kind of real in the book. Because yeah, I think this is the book I was saying where it started off completely different to how it ended, like with the genre and stuff. Because I think to start off with, it was quite robotic. I think how it was all going out. Because I think it was the first book I've ever wrote, and I was just trying to get pump it out, trying to get all the get words out. But yeah, as soon as I could tell as soon as like midway through when I finally found a name for them, I could sort of they had more of a personality. You could the sort of the way they talk to certain people, and obviously personalities clash and some don't. Some people get on better well with others, and yeah, it definitely evolved then on out. So yeah, I totally agree with as soon as they have a name, that's when it sort of becomes real for it all. But yeah, it's
And a
so
lot of times I may take a lot of notes and have a lot of ideas for scenes and conversations before I have the names, but I don't actually start that first draft
yeah,
without them. Again, mostly because I would super confuse myself. I
yeah,
do. It is hard enough for me a lot of times to keep everybody straight in some of these things, but um, for me, part of that process of really getting a picture of the story in my head and fleshing it out is naming the characters.
yeah,
That's when everything starts to really solidify for me, and that's when I feel like I'm at the point where I can take my outline, and then because usually I have my outline and then I have a whole page of just scribbled notes, like this would be
Yeah.
a really cool thing for a character to say here,
Yeah.
or this would be a really cool conversation, or this is a moment that I want to include in here somewhere. That's when they all start to make sense,
Yeah.
is when those names kind of bring everything together.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I've got one last question because I didn't actually know that you're. I had an idea you're obviously writing a new novel, um, but is it? Can you say much about it? Because I know more in the sense of the world building. I think because obviously the trilogy is more locally set, and then the Wolf Queen is completely different world. So is it? Are you going back to your
Um, this one is
earthly roots?
maybe it's maybe a mixture of both. Project, they might be aliens, like I said, as it is currently codenamed
Yeah.
until an official title and publishing decisions have been made. Is it's a dystopian. You could potentially call it a sci-fi dystopian because of the aliens,
Oh, okay.
if in fact
Cool.
they are aliens.
Yeah.
Which I cannot confirm or deny. But and I say I cannot confirm or deny because even though I finished it, I'm still not 100% sure.
Yeah.
It doesn't, in effect, as weird as it is to say, it doesn't really matter for
Yeah.
the book, like what they are. But it's a dystopian, so, and it's set in a future. It's set like 80 years in the future
Oh, okay.
of our world. So there were a lot of pieces of our world that I could just pull in and pull from.
Yeah.
And then, but then obviously I have this other group, the maybe aliens, that has a different culture and a different, they're just very different. They look different. Yeah. And so there was world building there. So that's why I said it was a combination. Some of it was really easier because it's real world, and then some of it was I am making up a totally different species. So
yeah, made it a bit more difficult. But I guess that was, I can imagine it was a bit more easier, but at the same time harder because obviously you're pulling two different things together. So I can imagine that was quite awkward.
And again, it was
times.
fun because it was different than what I've already done. But there were difficulties because, again, and part of the difficulty was we're set in a future, so things can't be exactly like they are now. Yeah. And we've introduced this other species, which changes things, but I still can keep some things the same. So trying to find the balance, trying to find a way to tie all of that together to basically create something new out of my imagination. And I'm really excited for that and how it turned out. I really have loved this story and felt like there's something special about it, even beyond my other books. I don't even know what, I can't pinpoint it, but I just feel like there's something special about these characters and their life that I'm really excited to share. So
I'm excited to get it.
Hopefully soon I'll be able to start sharing news and things about that. But
I'm excited for that. And also that's one thing I quite like the sound of as well, is how different all your books are from one another, because it's again back to the world building, because obviously they're completely different worlds from one another. They're easy to, might sound bad, it's easy to tell apart, because I think there's nothing worse when you're saying like reading two fantasy novels at a time. Sometimes you get a bit muddled up with what happens between books, and characters overlap because of how sort of similar it can be. But because they're so different, it's sort of it's a completely different story, and that's just even more enjoyment out of it.
There's no confusing the Wolf Queen for TCR, that is for sure. Although my friends and I have decided that probably once my next book comes out, that I should write bonus scenes in which Maggie meets characters from every
That would
book.
Be amazing.
That Maggie somehow pops into the world of the Wolf Queen, and like basically Maggie invites everybody to brunch. because it feels like a very Maggie thing to do.
Yes.
And I feel like she's the one that we want to see her reactions
Yeah.
to all of these other characters. And then I'm starting, like I said, I have another project now that one is off to publisher that I'm starting that is set modern day and will have some TCO3 Easter
Ooh,
eggs
nice.
in it.
Can't wait for that.
Because it's set modern day and it's not the same, it's not Demon Slayers, but there's a close enough supernatural thread
Yeah.
that I can work in some Easter eggs so
Yeah.
that those who know will know. And that one I can definitely write a bonus scene where Maggie shows up.
That'd
And I
be
have
good.
it all pictured in my I haven't even finished the book yet, but I have the Maggie bonus scene pictured in my head,
Yeah.
and it's going to be fabulous.
Nice.
Because it's going to be 100% Maggie
Yeah.
pep and lollipops and greatness.
Yeah. Also, I guess the fact with all the demons that normal humans can't see them, you can easily like just connect some little threads and stuff. Because you can't, if humans could see the demons, I think it would be a little bit more difficult. I think because then you'd
And
have
really,
to.
in this book, there's kind of a character. She's an older, sassy nun. And as I'm developing her, I just love her so much. And she's amazing. And as I first started writing her, I'm like, Maggie would love her. And I feel like she would love Maggie. And from there, it was like, I bet you I could tie in
Yes.
some little TCO3 Easter eggs in here. I could throw in a consecrated butter knife joke if I try hard.
Yeah.
And it not be outside of, it not be completely random. And so that sparked that on that I just, plus I feel I miss the TCO3 characters.
Yeah.
For several years, that's all that I was writing. And so I miss that little ragtag group of Demon Slayers.
Yeah. Well, when that comes out, I definitely gotta reread the trilogy just so I can then read the Maggie scene along with it.
So we can figure out like all the Maggie stuff that's going on. I'm trying to figure out how to have her pop into the Wolf Queen and invite them for brunch. Obviously, it will not make sense within the laws of physics.
Nah.
But it's fine.
It's Maggie. She'll find a way.
How does this even work? Because Maggie.
Yeah.
That's all that we know. She's going to break the fourth wall.
Yep.
And it'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think that I just feel like that would be a fun little way to offer some fun like bonus material just because.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Thank you for your time today talking about all your books.
Oh no, thank you so much for inviting me.
Sorry. Thank you. Theo, it was lovely to sort of, because obviously, as I said, I've read the trilogy. I'm looking forward to reading The Wolf Queen finally. And it's nice to hear all your sort of, how you wrote the book and like, how everything came to be. Because it just adds to sort of, especially when I reread them all, it sort of adds to the feeling of it all, I think.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad. I love having conversations like this. So thank you so much for inviting me.
That's all right. Thank you.